Hi, it's Mikey Leung with Digital Storytellers. We're here with another interview at the Social Marketplace. Sitting with me now is Bessie Graham, who's the CEO of the Difference Incubator. It's a business development program specifically targeted at social enterprises. I'm sure she'll correct me with more information if that's not necessarily correct. Bessie, welcome to the Social Marketplace interviews.
Thank you so much.
Great. So, a lot of your work at the Difference Incubator is helping to develop social enterprises and increase their capacity sort of from the ground up. How's that going?
Really well. I think there's a mix of current capacity within the social enterprise space. So you have some really well-established organisations like Green Collect, who we're working with, that have been operating for a decade and are already 80% sustainable on their own revenue streams. And down to groups like Policy Booth, who we're working with, who are very much a start-up in the social enterprise space. So while we're doing a similar kind of capacity building and working towards getting them to be an investable social enterprise, ready to take on capital beyond grants, there is that same kind of level of work that needs to happen from the ground up, as you're saying, of what is the business model that underpins this and makes it a sustainable business opportunity while still having that strong mission and social purpose of the organisation.
Great. Now, do you see, obviously there's a lot more social enterprises around nowadays here in Australia as well. Is that the case? Do you see a lot more new enterprises joining the space, or traditional non-profits moving in that direction? Or?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a growing area, both social enterprise and the impact investment space, as we're hearing about here today. As you have a kind of rise in the size and scope of social challenges that are being faced, but a decreasing bucket of grant funding available, you have enterprises and not-for-profits saying, okay, we want to see something good happen in the world, we have an idea or a vision, but we have limited access to granting funds. So what are we going to do? And social enterprise sort of is an option in that space that brings together a business model and a social mission and helps those things operate well. So it's definitely a growing area of interest.
Growing. Now I'm going to focus on that word for a moment. Does that mean that we have a lot more growing to do? Is the social enterprise space mature yet? Is the impact investment space mature yet, particularly here in Australia?
I would not say it's mature, no. I may have a different opinion on that to others, but I would say that it's developing. There is a lot of interest in it. I think there are still some really significant issues at the root of why it's not mature and it's not established. Some of those would be that it's still, for a lot of people, there's the fundamental question of, do people actually believe that business can do good? If you're looking at a lot of organisations that are coming from the not-for-profit space, there's still a worldview or a tendency to think profit is bad, business is bad, the not-for-profit space is where we're doing good. Social enterprise, if you're taking that blended value approach, impact investment, if you're taking a blended value approach, assumes that you believe that the vehicle of business can achieve positive social outcomes. So there's a fundamental issue there that needs to sort of be addressed or align with the people that are working in this space before I think we'll get the mass take-up of seeing the potential of what these spaces could be. There's also issues around framing what the actual issue is and then figuring out how to design approaches to that. So, we had an example of that would be, you have a lot of noise about the fact that access to capital is the biggest challenge for social enterprises. So then you have things like the CEDA funds that the federal government put out, and yet you see 3 fund managers having difficulty placing those funds. So there's an assumption that there wasn't enough capital out there. But actually the word that's important in that was access to capital. You have social enterprises not ready yet to access the capital in terms of have a deal on the table that is of interest and of value to investors. So some of those fundamental issues need to be dealt with so that the two spaces of impact investment and social enterprise can advance and become more mature.
And what would be the first step we'd need to take towards bridging that gap?
Sure. I would say there's a whole stack of things that need to go on, but we'll try and keep it to the point. There needs to be a shift from focus around trying to increase interest of capital in the space, so trying to encourage people to put capital into the area, and to look at balancing supply and demand and saying, okay, if we take that there is capital out there that wants to invest in this space, and we say, how do we actually make sure there's a pipeline of investment opportunity? It, for me, is figuring out how to design and deliver the kind of capacity building that increases the chance of developing an investable social enterprise. If you do that, and then you figure out how to fund it, because it's expensive and it's not the piece that people tend to want to pay for. I would say they're two crucial things that we need to do. So in terms of the incubator, that's what we're trying to figure out at TDI, is where we are designing and delivering that program that will ultimately hopefully prove out a model. And then we'd love to see something like an investment and contract readiness fund, which they have in the UK. Something like that operating here would be great to fund that kind of capacity building.
Okay. We're here at the social marketplace, which might be another one of the steps we need to take to grow the impact investment industry. What are you feeling about today's gathering?
It's great. I think often we've been operating in this space for many years, and so often you feel like you're having the same conversation with the same people over and over. What's nice here today is to see a whole group of people I've never met before, haven't heard about, different enterprises. Probably half of the enterprises that are represented in the stalls today I'm not actually familiar with, and that's good to kind of get some new blood in the mix and start to connect in new ways. I think we definitely recognise a need for this kind of platform, if you like, of education and awareness building. It needs to happen, and it's a new space, and people need to hear things many times before it kind of sinks in. So it's an exciting place to be.
And why have you decided to participate in it? From your perspective, obviously you have the history in it, but what really brings you here, and why are you involved in this space in the first place?
I'm a big fan of convergence. Anywhere where you're sitting in the middle of different ways of thinking, different ways of operating, and can bring the best out of different sectors, for example, onto one issue and try and do something more effectively together, create some synergy. I like that kind of space. I think they're the areas I want to work, and so for me it is this bringing together of both government, not-for-profits, business. How do we focus on some social challenges and do that in a way that brings out the best of each space? That's the kind of area I want to be working in, so that's why I'm here.
Cross-sector collaboration.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that cross-sector collaboration a recent development, or something that we've all admitted that we need to do better together? I'm interested in that from the CSI perspective, because that's what they're about. Could you reflect on that? Yeah,
so I think cross-sector collaboration there's always been some people speaking about that. For those of us that have already drunk the Kool-Aid, it seems obvious that we need to do that to get the best outcomes. But I think it is something that is becoming more accepted mainstream. So, not the current issue, but the one before of the Harvard Business Review had whole articles on why tri-sector leaders were important, and why people who had that ability to work across sectors, why they bring value to organisations. And I think more and more we are realising in government circles, not-for-profit circles and business, that the kinds of challenges we're facing, whatever angle we're coming at them from, the complexity requires us to have insight into different ways of operating. So I think it's a growing space, it's a much needed area, and while it's often more difficult and complicated to work in a collaborative way, and not every situation warrants collaboration, so I'm not saying in every case you have to, but these kind of big messy challenges really need us to have the right mix of minds in the room.
I'm going to ask you a personal one on this one. I'm looking at a lot of social enterprises here. I haven't met many of them in the room yet, but we're all coming at various capacities. We here at Digital Storytellers are on the very start of that journey, thinking about how we can approach this market. What advice would you give to an organization like ours if we were just starting that journey? And how would somebody access that knowledge and experience you have in seeing how that could be created?
I think one of the really crucial things that you see in organisations as they start to grow is whether or not at the beginning they had a sense of building a commercially sustainable business model. So not taking away from the whatever the passion and social drive is for the organisation, that's great. That's your unique kind of thing that's driving you. But build into it from the beginning an assumption that you need to have a business model where revenues are at least equal to, preferably greater than, costs. If you can do that, and if you design the business like that, I think you end up with a much more robust organisation that will actually have more social impact, ultimately, than if you go into it kind of desperately trying to find enough of a grant to get you started and then operate in a reactive, opportunistic way that doesn't leave the space, the headspace to kind of design the organisation well from the beginning. So I'd say start with a business model in terms of, once you've got that idea, foundation of a really solid business model where you can clearly articulate who your customer segments are, what your value proposition is to them, and then build the model out from there is a powerful place to start. And that's not a cop-out or a mission drift away from your personal mission or vision for the organisation, but it's setting you up well, I think.
Great. Well, today you have $10,000 in your pocket, just like everyone else. There's a lot of organizations to choose from here today. Do you have any leading horses in the race so far?
I must admit I'm a bit torn because there is, Sandy explained the rules at the beginning of the day in terms of if you were going into some of the bigger funds and players in the space, you had to put all your money into them to kind of simulate the actual market, or you could split your money up if you were going with the smaller organisations. And we heard a bit earlier today in the great debate this whole topic of, do you start small, grassroots, or do you go to the big end of town? So I must admit, the honest answer is I'm still toying up between, doing all in the impact investment group or splitting between some of the fantastic up-and-coming organisations that are here. I think there are some really great projects. I don't see in all of them yet a solid business model or the commercial side necessarily in place. No doubt about the social passion and mission there, but I think there are some that have got the beginnings of a really good business model. So I'll probably end up leaning towards splitting my money up, but still deciding.
All right, Bessie, thanks so much for your time today.
All right, thank you.